All right, well, welcome everyone. One thing I'd like to, this is the no-till and regenerative leaders discussion. You know, when everyone signed up for Farmer2Farmer this year, we had a little form on, as to what questions and what topics people were most interested in, and we used that data to then match you up into the crop circles, into the networking sessions. And by a factor of 2 to 1, the most popular choice was no-till and regenerative agriculture. So that was actually completely unexpected for us. We didn't anticipate that, but I think it really goes to show how quickly these practices have been transforming production agriculture. We have some data through FBN polling. The fastest growing tillage type is, of course, no-till. And we can discuss that in some of the polls you all answer as FBN members throughout the year. So one of the things I'd like to say before I introduce everyone is that a lot of the folks here are involved in an organization called No-Till on the Plains. And we've come to get to know No-Till on the Plains. It's a phenomenal group. We come down to the meeting in Wichita, and I encourage anyone interested in this, because I got to learn a lot there, to go to their meeting. It's really, really fun, and it's kind of exactly like Farmer2Farmer. It's a lot of people getting together and learning and trying to learn, trying to improve, and it's really got the same atmosphere. So we really appreciate that. And what we've been working on with the folks on, everyone here, Rick and Lance and Doug and Justin, is figuring out what the role of data, and what can a network do in regenerative agriculture. So not just in the information capture, but perhaps in practice management, what are we learning? But then ultimately also, I'm very interested in, can we do marketing? Can we figure out markets, and can we use the network to represent or even advance consumer marketing around regenerative agriculture to get you paid for your practices? Because right now, you know, it's an open question as to how you get paid for doing things in this manner on your farm. So this is a great personal interest of mine, and it's an honor for me to have so many of the country's, you know, really leading thinkers around this join us. So with that, I'll introduce the panel. Sitting next to me is Rick Bieber from Trail City, South Dakota. I encourage everyone to have very detailed agronomic bios in the program, so just please read the program for their full bios. Doug Palin from Concordia, Kansas. Doug and I got to know each other through the CARTA organization and the research work that they were doing. Lance Fikert, also from Kansas, and Justin Knopf from Kansas. So with that, we would like to play a quick little video. Let's see if the slide will work. Do I push? Oh, there it goes. And do I have to push a button? There it goes.
I think people really are starting to be aware that something is wrong.
In the last 100 years, we've lost half of the basic building block that makes soil productive. Half of it's gone.
Soil health is very important, not only for farmers, but for the consumer and the general public, because we all like to eat. And I don't think any of us are going to volunteer to give that up anytime soon.
From now until 2060, we're going to have to produce as much food as we've produced in the last 500 years.
Soil is a living, breathing system. Sometimes we have to feed it a little for it to feed us. And it's like a relationship. If you're in a relationship where all you do is take, and you take the maximum you can at every opportunity, what are the odds of that relationship lasting very long?
When you battle, you don't really tend to accomplish things.
Never have I seen among farmers such a broad quest for knowledge as I'm seeing now.
The soil renaissance is going to transform the entire agricultural industry. This will be historical.
So, and that is a preview of a movie, right? Of Living Soil.
Documentary, yeah.
And so the first question that I had for the group, which is really something they educated me on, was that I always talk about this in terms of cover crops and no-till, and a lot of people think about regenerative ag in that context. But the first question is really, how do you define regenerative agriculture?
when we look at what we're doing on our farm, I consider myself not a farmer, but as a soil caretaker. And in order to do all that, we have to bring back all the balances to life, not only in our soil, but above the soil surface, in our communities and our families. And when it comes to the soil side of things, we have to have a continual living root in the soil so that we feed carbon to the system, because that's the thing that drives the system. We have to have minimal disturbance, and that minimal disturbance could be either with iron or with chemicals. Both disturb the soils and they disrupt the flow of action of life within the soil. We have to have soil armor on our soil at all time. The soil armor is previous residues, or it may be living residues that are out there. And what they are is the clothing to your soil to keep the raindrops from beating your soils up, and to keep the sunlight from burning your soils, and to keep the wind off it. They're like the clothing to our body is what our soil armor is. The livestock integration, what that does is bring back to our soils of the North American continent what God had there in the beginning was the North American bison. And they were there at all times, traveling back and forth across the soils with their hooves, disrupting certain things, foliar feeding the plants with their tongues and salivas and things like that. And then you have to have plant diversity. If we go out into our native grasses and native prairies and things like that, we have hundreds of species of things growing out there at one time. So how can we pick one and say it's the best when Mother Nature has hundreds? So those are the 5 principles of soil health that we deal with as regenerative farmers.
So I mean, as Charles mentioned, initially when we talked about this, we talked about it being really a lack of tillage, and I think all of us have recognized, as Rick pointed out, the 5 principles. So I think we want to have a discussion more around these principles and how to manage them. So.
One question I have, we obviously had Adam Savage this morning talking about myth busting, and I think, this is an area that's kind of ripe with certain understandings about tillage. And so I would ask, Doug, I'd start with you, but we can go down the line. But what are the biggest myths about no-till or regenerative ag that you think need to be addressed publicly?
Well, the first one that comes up is everybody says, well, if you quit, we need to till the soil to keep it loose and to have air in it and for water to get in, and to the contrary, or people think it's going to get hard, and it just doesn't. In the native system, there's no tillage anywhere in the native system, and it works just fine. So I think that's one of the, just pick one quick myth buster, that'd be that people think soil is going to get hard, and it doesn't.
I think from where the area I'm at, a lot of people, I'm in Southwest Kansas, and they just believe that it's not going to work there because, especially trying to do cover crops, they use moisture, they take away all the moisture, the limited moisture that we get, but having a living and growing crop in there, it helps out with the infiltration of water and later on when we get moisture. So when you hear it won't work there, that's a myth I'm trying to break.
I think a challenge for me and my family has been that, I want to arrive and, have this figured out, and we never arrive. And so I think that's, how it's helped me to think about this system is I don't have to necessarily have all 5 of these things figured out this cropping season. If where is my trajectory going? And that's been really helpful for me to kind of get a grasp on this system and how to change the trajectory of where our farm is going in the long term, in my lifetime, and the next generation that stewards that land. Where is that trajectory? And I can make big changes by making small changes, small incremental improvements today. So I think that's a myth for me that I had to bust, is I can't figure it all out. But what I can do is make small incremental changes and have continual improvement that will make big changes across time.
One of the biggest myths, I think, is that soils are a dead medium and all they do is hold our plants, when in fact they're a living ecosystem onto themselves. And you have to have a certain amount of each one of them families within the soils to make it all come into a balance. And once it comes into a balance, now we start seeing natural releases that are in the soil as far as nutrients go. When we test our soils for everything you guys all test for, the nitrogen, phosphorus, all them goody things that make you feel good and spend money. But we also test for total availables, and we test for biologicals, bacteria and fungus, protozoas, all those things. And the surprising thing is that when you send your soils in this year, please ask for totals. And you will not believe how much nutrient is in your ground. We don't have an acre on our farm that's under 2,500 pounds of nitrogen in the soil already. And the only way it becomes available is to have the balances within the ecosystem there. And now it becomes available moment by moment rather than big gobs that we put on with spreaders and applicators. So the soil is alive, and we have to treat it with anything else we treat that is alive with respect.
One thing, Justin, you raised is sort of wanting it all at once, here and now, going to work first year. How you guys have all been doing this, for over the last couple decades in many cases, and how long did it take in your cases to sort of get the practices underway and get to the point where you felt you had it down, or is it constantly evolving? Is it never stopped?
For me, it's constantly evolving, and it evolves. I think it evolves for our family. Starting out, it was just a recognition of the trajectory that we were on from a natural resource and a soils resource standpoint on the current practices that we were doing when my brother and I returned to the farm in around '03. And that, in combination with some of our core values of how we run our family business, made a big shift in our trajectory. And since that point in time, yes, it's been a continual process, and that process is driven by interactions with other farmers and scientists and consumers, food companies, and so ours is constantly evolving. I just finally got the livestock integration this fall for the first time, or working with a close, longtime friend of mine that put a few steers out on one of our fields. So we're just starting to learn about that. So I think each family and farm is going to have an independent pace, but I've broken it down at how are we moving forward and having continuous improvement across time.
All right, anyone else, or Doug?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think that, the first step is the most important one, that
Right.
you do something, and yeah, many of us have been involved in this for 20 or 30 years and are still continue to
Right.
learn and understand and share, and that's why we're all farmers up here, folks, and as you are, and so we're just sharing, and we learn so much from you as we get into questions and answers too. So
You can do it overnight, or you can take a lifetime to do it. It's when you change your thought process is when it happens. And when you change your thought process, everything starts to fall into place very, very quickly. Like Justin was saying there, it just comes together for you, and you know what path you want to go on. But you have to have it happen here first.
What was the most important sort of early decision in making that transition for you?
Ours was a financial crisis of the 80s. Our farm got foreclosure notices. And just before Dad was ready to turn the land over to the bank, I was young, dumb, and didn't have anything to lose. So I said, what if? And they said, okay. So away we went, and we literally sold the tillage equipment to put fuel into tractors to plant the crop. That's when we started no-tilling. We've always had livestock on the place, so we've always had that integration there. The soil armor I learned about 20 years ago. The continual roots, the cover crops, we've been doing them for 20 years. But to have a living root in soils that are 800 or 8 hours north of you here, where it gets to minus 30 for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, how do you keep your ground from freezing so it doesn't kill them roots? And we've had that happen here in the last 5-6 years. So it continues to evolve for us. And it's an unbelievably fascinating thing when it happens.
For us, it was we were full tillage, and went to a couple of no-till on the plains conferences, and it was a quick change. We went from getting rid of blades and disc and all equipment and went to less equipment. That saved a lot of time. It saved moisture. As we went into no-till, we had cattle operation, and we decided that the cattle were going to compact it. And then once we started going to more meetings and learning about livestock integration, then we jumped back in, and it's turned us around well.
Can I just ask the audience, how many folks are already doing one of these 5 practices on the farm today? That's a great deal, great deal. And how many folks are sort of looking to get started and trying to figure out where to start? Great. Well, so then I just want to get into so now that once you've got this underway, and a lot of folks are already well into several of the practices, how are you monitoring the improvements? How do you keep track of it? How do you know when it's working? And how are you adjusting your operations? Is it simply soil test, or what other mechanisms are you using to track and improve?
Yeah, there's certainly, in recent years, or in the last 5 years particularly, we're starting to better really understand, understand's not the right word, be aware of the biological system and what's happening in the soil, and there's a lot of labs that are doing that, and I think that's not, don't get hung up on the absolute numbers of protozoa or fungi or bacteria in the soil, but just understand it's important to kind of be aware of, cognizant of that there are, as Rick mentioned earlier, there is so much going on in the soil, and you've probably all heard it before. There's, in a handful of soil, there's more organisms than there are people on this planet. You often think about that, and you think, there's got to be a lot going on there, and they all interact with one another. And so I think it's important to watch those things. Again, there's tools to measure those, but I think just being in the field, understanding these basic principles, and just learning, kind of back to what we did earlier. I just think you have to open your mind and be willing to educate yourself and learn, because we as producers have, in most cases, grown up with a system that was much different than we are now. And so I think that's important, to just be open to educate yourself and to learn and be aware.
Doug mentioned being in the field, and that's been one of the most important things for me, and I think for many of us, is just spending time observing in your field. Take a spade out and look at roots, look for earthworms, look when it's hot and dry, look when it's cool and wet, and just observe what's happening in that lower plant canopy and at the landscape level and down to the smallest details that we can see. Some specific things that we are measuring improvement on, or that we look to see that we're making improvement by integrating some of these practices, is the biggest one for us is resilience. That is, bottom line, a lot of the decision making that we are working on deals with resilience with weather, with trade wars, with diversity, with the resilience of our young families, and spending time with them, and keeping that balanced. So I think being able to see, coming through a year this year where many farms in our community were chopping their corn because it was rated for crop insurance at 5 or 10 bushel, and we have one of our more long-term fields that we've integrated these principles on, or a handful of them. We were able to harvest the grain, and it was above our APH levels, and so it was just an example for me of there's moments where you can see that resilience showing up, and those are, I think, big milestones.
Are there any particular tests that are most critical to you, or technical measuring that practices and you integrate it with precision ag and other ways? Anything you'd recommend to the group?
On our farm, I think the most important thing we have is a shovel. And the most important instrument we have, once we have the shovel in the soil, are our eyes and our nose and our ears. And a person doesn't realize that, but when you turn your shovel over, when you put it in the ground and you slowly tip it back, the things you hear happening within the soil, in a living soil. In a dead soil, you kind of hear just a whatever. But in a living soil, you hear all kinds of things happening. And the smells you have, and the sights you see. When it's very first turned over, if you have a magnifying glass and you're there, if you let it get exposed to the sunlight, you can see all the things retracting away from the sunlight. And as the air hits it and starts drying it or warming it or cooling it, something different than what's in the soil, you can see the things retracting back into the clod of soil that you pulled out. That shows you it's alive. There's all kinds of labs that you can send your stuff to, and they can quantify it. But how do you quantify life without death? As I sit here, somebody might think I'm a pretty good character. But that doesn't mean what happens tomorrow won't change your opinion of me. And you can't quantify my life until I'm dead. So we can't quantify the life in the soil until it's killed. And why would we kill it?
Well, we'll have to somehow figure out an FBN shovel test.
Yeah.
We can plug it to the data, take a photo.
And guys like Charles don't like people like me.
Well, it may not be quantifiable in that sense, and I guess that's sort of the question, that one of the questions that triggered this. And actually, one question I have for the audience: how many people have entered their tillage data into FBN in the tillage section? How many? Just a handful. Okay, so that is, for everyone who's not aware, there is the ability to enter tillage on all your fields, and so you can tell us at a minimum at least what tillage type. And that data goes into the FBN system on the seed analysis, the rotation analysis, your yield analysis, but also underlies a lot of the things we'd like to be able to do around quantifying and really measuring both yield and long-term productivity impacts and optimal management strategies around tillage. So one of the key things we wanted to just ask and emphasize is we wanted to encourage everybody to participate in this research with us. And we want to ask the questions, both to the panel and to the audience as to what the role of data could be, in regenerative. Separately is how do we make it pay with marketing. But so I will personally show anybody how to do that down in the FBN at any of the screens, and it's in the My Practices tab. But you go do that. That's the very first starting step, because it allows us to incorporate all that other information, the weather information, the type, the tillage, the seed and population, everything.
On our farm, I just told you what I consider is the most important instrument to test with. And that's myself being there and seeing the soils for the generations that we've seen them. But we do the testing. We do the standard tests that you folks all do, and we do PLFA tests and Haney tests and Sylvita tests. Because when I stand in front of audiences, you always have naysayers that say this don't work and that doesn't work. So what we try to do is we try to quantify things for the naysayers. So that way they can't tear you to pieces that regenerative agriculture doesn't work, because it's literally kept our family farm in the family. I retired in May, my son's taken over the farm, so it's off and going very well, 5th generation.
So I guess I'd have a question on data to the panel, and then we will open up for Q&A in just a couple minutes. But I just wanted to ask Doug and Lance and Justin if there's anything that came to mind on data. Big questions that we could answer. What data is missing? What can we be looking at?
I think that, I'm really excited about again, speaking as a farmer and a member of Farmers Business Network, I'm excited about what they do and how they can analyze data. I've been involved in no-till or soil health for a long time, and I'm excited about identifying some of those trends. We as farmers talk about things and share experiences, but I think FBN really brings a real strength to that information. So we as members, putting that information in the database and being able to with your data analysis and analyzers to look at what impacts are really having, whether it's cover crops, and what impact is that having on our yield stability or resilience. And so those are things I'm anxious to take a look at for no-till farmers or no-till on the plains, perhaps working with FBN to build a program where we can really dig into that data and understand it better.
And also it leads into marketing and things like that goes well. And so that gives us an opportunity that if we're doing these practices, can we build on that and in turn give marketing and things like that as well.
Absolutely.
What are the biggest questions you think we should, one of the things we talked about in No-Till on the Plains last year is answering these questions around productivity and yield performance at scale. When we did our first row spacing poll, we got a couple million acres of response, but we were able to match that up to your yield and planting data within 3 days, and within 4 days of just doing that poll, we could actually do the first national assessment of row spacing and yield across, at that time, about 2 or 3 million acres, which is way beyond what an academic can ever, collate. And so we really want to be able to do that again here. And so the question, really the whole challenge of the FBN data system is just all you got to know is what question you want to ask. And once we get the questions that, to address and to ask, then we can go out and get the data. And so what would be the biggest ones that you think, maybe even going back to myth busting or kind of long-term productivity? Is it economics? Is it what's the true yield impact? Or is it, what would you say? Or does any come to mind?
Justin?
What would be the purpose in implementing any of those 5 principles?
The purpose of to the farm.
Yes.
I don't think data will answer that. And that's the,
Well,
yeah.
yeah. Do you mean in the sense of economic return or sustainability?
Ask a farmer why he's doing a cover crop. Is he doing it because the
Right.
government's paying him to do it? Or because he sees the reason for regenerative
Yeah.
agriculture? Or if you ask them why they're no-tilling versus tillage, or why they have a living root versus nothing, why do they have animals versus not anymore? Those type of, just to find out where the core principles are of the producers and where the roadblocks are, why they won't implement. Like Justin said, you don't have to implement all. If there's 5 soil health principles and you implement 4, that's an 80 percentile. And we've learned a long time ago, 80% passes you, it gets you out of high school. So, and if you do 3 of them, that's a 60%, that's still a majority. So why aren't people or still
Right.
doing none of them?
I think we're on we've all been doing chemical soil testing the chemical properties of our soils for, a generation. I think carbon is unequivocally important to the biological system, and I think also it's important to this regenerative movement that's really been built from the ground up. And but I think the biological testing, we're on just the tip of an iceberg of what we're able to begin to have glimpses of. I think trace genomics is here, and they're looking at trying to do things at the molecular level. We work with Ward Labs, and they're the PFLA testing. I'm still trying to get my mind around what it represents and everything. But at the end of the day, the big question I'm asking myself is, what's the value of that data not only to our farm, but also to the story and to the marketplace? And I think that there's meetings happening all the time and among food companies, and we're reading in press about this regenerative agricultural movement and climate change, and how a lot of the marketplace is clamoring to have solutions for those real big, perceived problems. And so I think as a farmer, I think we've got with these principles, have some fantastic solutions to some of those concerns that a lot of people are talking about. But the question for me is how do we've talked all about taking control. How do we take control of the solutions that we have to offer and seek out the true partners in the marketplace that are actually willing to be a true partner with the farmers that are delivering these environmental services to our neighbors and our communities? We do it because of stewardship, like Rick has talked about, and yet there's also, I think, multiple layers of value there that should be explored. And I think that's a question for FBN, and that they seem to be positioned to be a great partner for farmers. And I think that's a question for us as producers, is who in that marketplace are willing to have a true partnership and not just take credit for work that we're doing already.
Does anyone jump to mind? Has any company, food company, stood out in terms of its support or, really trying to create a market access? Still, I mean, this is a challenge. Our marketing is, we've been working. We have a buyer access team, and we've gone out to all kinds of, companies, and it all just comes back to how do we actually drive premiums and get people paid. And part of the missing piece in my mind is that you know, where it's not to advocate for more labels, but, you know, organic and non-GMO clearly have premiums in the market because consumers are able to, you know, differentiate. And regardless of, you know, views on those topics, they have rapidly growing consumer demand, and it creates real opportunities and creates premiums for farmers. And so how do we do the same thing here in regenerative? We actually had an interesting discussion with the ethanol players because they're trying to get into low carbon fuel standards. And one of the problems they have is that a bushel of corn is treated as a bushel of corn. Well, a bushel of corn is not a bushel of corn from a carbon standpoint if you have a different practice producing it. And so that could actually, you know, move ethanol into different markets, you know, with low carbon fuels if you can quantify it on a regenerative basis, and that could be traced and tracked as a regenerative bushel, for example. So that question of how do you get paid is, you know, beyond the input savings, the practice savings, and the long-term soil benefits and nutrient benefits, you know, is a big one we want to work on, and we are wide open to everyone's ideas and help on that. With that, I wanted to make sure I stop talking and open it up to questions from the audience because the fellows here are really, you know, true experts, as are I'm sure many of you in the audience, and would love to open it up to any questions, you know, from the audience that anyone has.
How much time is left?
And we got about 15 minutes or so. Any questions? There a question in the back there?
Here we have one.
Oh, go ahead.
My name is Bill Reddig. I'm from Northeast Montana. Been no-tilling for 8 years and seen the benefit, the moisture in the soil. We don't get much rain, but our one problem is wireworm. And what are your thoughts on seed treats or any ideas on control that? Because the soil stays wet and moist, we have had trouble with wireworm.
Rick, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess what crop are you challenged with? Spring wheat.
Yeah.
We had those issues many, many years ago, back in the 90s. And it's one of the beginning issues when you step away from the tillage event. You allow the moisture to come, you allow all the other things that come along with it, because moisture brings life to your soils, so you have the life. But what you have is you have a system that's out of balance. And it's one of them things you just kind of have to bite the bullet a little bit and hope you don't go broke in the meantime of doing it. And I say that kind of jokingly, but a little bit of seriousness to it also, is the seed treatments, we used to do them. 30 years ago we did them. And as we backed away from the seed treatments in our wheats, basically, the winter wheat, the wireworms would eat us alive, so you wouldn't have winter survivability, things like that. And eventually that problem went away, and what we perceived as a new problem came. And then that problem went away, and another one came. And that one went away, and another one came. And they keep stacking up. And as the system starts coming back into balance, you start having everything get into its checks and balances, where the predators outnumber the prey, basically. So now your system is in balance, and we still have wireworms. You can go dig up and stuff like that, and they aren't an economic threshold to us anymore. So it's in no-till, in regenerative agriculture, in agriculture, in life, one of the things you have to do to have a more content life is you have to accept the word tolerance. And you have to allow a certain tolerance in your fields. When we step into what we perceive as agriculture, being taught as agriculture today, is we're all supposed to have real pristine looking fields, and they're supposed to be uniform, and they're all supposed to come up at the exact same moment, so we can harvest them at the exact same moment, so we can go fishing at the exact same moment. And that's not how nature works. But after you start having your system work like nature, it becomes very, very easy to put your head on your pillow at night and sleep when the system isn't balanced.
Oh, we have a question over on the side, looks like.
Yeah, Mike from Z, Central Iowa, corn bean rotation. Your comment about a chemical disturbance caught my ear, and I'm open to listening. I know we've used anhydrous, and that can be a problematic to the microorganisms. But I'm also learning a lot about the probiotics coming in. So I'm wondering if there's significant chemicals that you're taking away from your operating system, and other beneficials you're adding other than for the foliars or other things that are significant adds to your program.
Other beneficial products
Are you guys using any biostimulants or any source of carbon that you throw in with your stuff to juice it up?
No. I think kind of going back even to the first question, I think it's important that we understand that as we look at a regenerative system or a system, cropping diversity is important, so always maintaining crop rotation, sanitation, competition. We speaking to chemicals or additions, to me, I utilize all those basic things as the first line of defense. So we rotate crops just to prevent things from building that we don't want. So we're rotating crops, we're using competition, narrow rows, trying to get the sunlight where we want, and I only utilize those things or herbicides or crop protection products to augment that system in cases where I need them. And so, and speaking to with regards, there's lots of biostimulants and kind of bug in a jug things. I don't know. I don't utilize those on my farm. As I learn more about the soil biology and try and educate myself about that, it makes me wonder if adding things that I don't really understand how they function in that system or ecosystem is a good thing or not. Not to say that we don't use things that we know may be potentially are harmful to that biology, but again, those are kind of the last line of defense for my operation. So that's how I kind of balance that.
If you look at what your system needs, whatever's in your system, and you look at what it needs and you look at what it's doing to survive while it's there. So just take an insect, for example. It's in your system, and what it needs is your plant. And the reason it's there is because you have a deficiency somewhere in your field that's allowing it to live there. And the volatile organic compounds that are cast into the air draw that particular pest into your field. Most insects that are out there eat a simple sugar. We as humans eat complex sugars. And the only way, the way to get them to quit bothering your plant is to take that plant from being simple sugar plant to a complex sugar plant. And you can do that in a matter of 24 hours if you test your plants. So over the last couple of years, and we've just stumbled onto this in my travels, I visited with a number of people that were doing this, so let's take it back home and let's try it on this 1,000-acre field, for example. And we're using the Brix readers to find out where our sugar contents are at in our plants. And if we're a little bit low on Brix, we'll find out what the tissue samples say and what we need to add, and we'll put that on as a foliar applicant. Now we don't need an insecticide. The insects just went away because they can't eat the complex sugars. Diseases are the same way. So those are some of the things that we're doing on our farm that are a little bit friendlier than what the old perceived way was. I'm going to run an analogy by you real quick. My grandfather died in the 1960s, and my father died 4 years ago, and God willing, I'm going to live at least 5 more minutes to get off stage. And my son, I hope to live for another 40 years, and my grandson's perhaps 80 more years. But you see, we as humans are finite. We are going to die. Our bodies are going to die. The soils is where life on the earth has started, so why do we continue to try to kill them? We continue to put things on them and in them that are harmful. And if we look at all the things we put on our soils over the course of a season, and the amounts that we put out there, they're no more than addicted. And I'm not an organic producer, and we still use a lot of synthetic inputs, so don't get me wrong, I'm not going there. We do have some soils that we haven't had any synthetic inputs in 5 years, and they're very, very productive and very, very profitable. But as we continue to put all these things in. If you relate that to your children, if your children were as addicted to chemicals as your soils were, you'd have them institutionalized. So why do we continue to do it to our soils? Why don't we figure out how not to do it to them so they can function properly?
This year, three of us on the stage, along with another producer, we did a companion crop with milo and planting companions in and trying to combat the sugarcane aphid in milo. And so we've put out some where we could try to get some pollinators out there, also get the beneficial insects and making that work. And so that was just one of the first years of trying to do a study on something like that to see if we can actually yield the same or do just as well without using chemicals if they get to high enough numbers where you spray. And so little things like that, working on 15, 20 acre patches and then trying to follow up with research and trying to do it again and again and see if that works without having to use chemicals. So that's something that we're just trying to do step by step.
Any more questions in the audience? Looks like in the back there.
Am I on? Test, test. Hi, my name is Jason Bishop from Washington State, dryland wheat. You had the 5 principles of regenerative agriculture up there, and I was just wondering, I imagine you guys have goals to get to a higher level of regenerative agriculture in your mind. What are some obstacles you've come up with, and how have you overcame them?
Great question. Everyone hear that about goals and obstacles on getting to the higher plane of regenerative?
I've got a brand new one. So I've known Doug for a few years, and actually when we first met, he was talking about, I really think I need to integrate some livestock in my farm. I don't own any cattle, and that's probably been 5-6 years ago, maybe longer. I don't know. And I remember thinking, well, that's great. I'll be really interested to see how that turns out, because I want nothing to do with livestock. And I don't know anything a lot about livestock, and I don't have a big desire to learn a lot about cattle. But as I've observed things, I think that I do want to learn about it and how it can impact the cropping system that my family's working with on our soils. And so that was a big obstacle to me to get my mind wrapped around and to be open-minded about. I'm an agronomist by training. I didn't take a single animal science class at Kansas State for good reason, because I just wasn't that interested in it and don't know that I'd be very good at it. But in overcoming that obstacle, I thought, okay, thinking a little bit more holistically, I've got an old friend that I've wanted to spend more time with, and he knows about cattle, and so he's bought a few extra cattle, and we've talked through some agreed upon goals on my desires to have impact and test impact in our cropping system, and some of his goals in his cow herd and what he hopes to do with the business there. And came to agreements upon where those goals line up and put some boundaries around it, and that was a way for me to just get a start at overcoming that obstacle in my mind. And I think, so that's an example recently from my farm, and I think there's a lot of generational obstacles that all of us that farm with family work through and are working through, and that's going to be a continual thing in family businesses. But I really believe that we have a tremendous opportunity across the landscape of the middle of our country to make some significant change as this generational change happens. I know on our farm that was when a big change to our cropping system happened. So I would just tell those of you that are coming up to that transition from the younger side, that to be bold about your ideas but yet balance that with respect to experience and wisdom to the older generation. And I guess I would share with the older generation, I was very blessed by the trust that our Father gave us in having new ideas and overcoming some of the obstacles in his mind by giving us the freedom to experiment at a level of comfort that was comfortable for our family. And that's going to be unique for each family situation. So I think that's a tremendous opportunity we have to clean up and improve on scale a lot of the improvement that we really ought to be doing in agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. Great. I think we are at the time. But I encourage everyone, if you have any questions, please come up after the panel. And I really do want to make a very sincere plug for two things. One is that if you haven't been, definitely go to No Till on the Plains annual meeting. What day is in January 19?
The end of January.
End of January in Wichita.
Yeah, in Wichita.
And they are downstairs. They have a booth. Steve Swaffer, the president, is here. And it's really the most energetic and fun farm event I've been to, outside of Farmer2Farmer. And as I was joking at the panel, I drank about 9 Mountain Dews today, so it's especially energetic for me. But it really is. It's a phenomenal group of people, a huge array of topics, very focused on shared learning, just like Farmer2Farmer. It's the exact same feel, and it's the most fun I've had at an event. So if you haven't gone, you really should go. It's a phenomenal organization. And the second is to join us in this undertaking. I think, as Justin just mentioned, agriculture is the largest user of land on the planet. It's the largest physical undertaking that humanity has. So its impact on the planet is vast. Your opportunity to impact soils and impact the future of food production is enormous. I thought the video this morning really summarized it all quite well, and exactly what Rick just said. Life begins and ends with the soil, and we all have a duty to it. And so please join us in that. We don't know yet what questions we're going to ask of you. We want to ask a lot. The number one way you can get started is just please enter your tillage information into the FPN system. Try not to leave Farmer2Farmer without doing it. We'll show you how to do it downstairs in the booth. There's those 40 desks. All we got to do is drop your tillage type by field. And if you do that, just the people in this room, I bet there's several 100,000 acres of farms just in this room. You will have taken the data set from here to here. And that gives us this body of information to then start running queries on, and we can really get going. So that's what we'd ask, is just please join us in that. But thank you to the panelists. Thanks everyone for driving in and for coming. And with that, please give a round of applause to all these great folks.